Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Britain's top civil servant has warned that a no-deal Brexit would be, quotes, catastrophic for British business. In a letter leaked to the Daily Mail, Sir Mark Sedwill told ministers the UK could be plunged into recession, see soaring food prices, and predicted that some businesses which trade with the EU could face total collapse. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has been at one company which has very serious worries about the imminent future.
They've made their business hiring and building the kit for construction. And the German engineer who runs this small firm also designs clean air filters for dirty diesel diggers. With new pollution rules getting stricter, the business is poised for growth. But it's the toxic atmosphere in Westminster that's clouding their future.
A week after Brexit, so to speak, we still haven't got a clue what the following week will bring. Whether there will be a Brexit, what sort of Brexit, it is just unbelievable and unparalleled, and I never thought I would actually live through anything like that.
Their filter factory is in Bulgaria, so they're somewhat insulated, but they're worried about components getting in and out if there's no deal. And in general, construction is down, which makes planning impossible. After the latest round of parliamentary wrangling, businesses have woken up more confused than ever. With no support for Theresa May's deal and no alternative agreed upon either, for them, the idea of no deal is more alive than ever before. And while big businesses can afford to stockpile and move people and products, for the thousands of small and medium businesses like this one, that simply isn't an option.
Stockpiling is a wonderful concept if you actually have the money to stockpile. I haven't taken for the last 13 years, anything out of the company. I have reinvested every penny, and not to stockpile, not to basically sort of build for something that should not happen in a civilized world, but for
To grow.
growth.
I always ensure the Cabinet has the information they need to make the decisions they make.
Which I take as a yes.
From a plain-speaking German to the UK's top civil servant, Mark Sedwill, discreet in person, but whose letter to the Daily Mail was much more stark. In the letter, he warned no deal would see food prices increase by up to 10%, businesses and households struggling to get credit, enormous pressure on the government to bail out companies on the brink, and direct rule introduced in Northern Ireland.
L'option du no deal est vraisemblable.
The no-deal option looks likely. That was the assessment this morning of the EU's top negotiator, Michel Barnier, ahead of Theresa May's statement this afternoon, in which she said she would seek an extension and appeared to hint at a softer Brexit.
The ideal outcome of this process would be to agree an approach on a future relationship that delivers on the result of the referendum, that both the Leader of the Opposition and I could put to the House for approval, and which I could then take to next week's European Council.
The government insists it's done all it can to mitigate against the impact of a no deal, and some businesses say they're not worried. But from food to pharmaceuticals, construction to car firms, the majority say no deal would be disastrous for them and the economy. And unless and until the EU agrees yet another delay, that's exactly what they're planning for.
Siobhan Kennedy. Now, earlier, I spoke to Stephen Armstrong. He's the chairman of Ford Europe. He says the firm is spending tens of millions of pounds preparing for a possible no-deal Brexit. I asked him what that outcome would mean for his business in the UK.
Well, we've been very consistent from the day of the referendum that no deal is not an option. Anything that drives friction at the borders or tariffs between the UK and mainland Europe would be a disaster, not only for Ford Motor Company, but we believe for the industry, the automotive industry in general. So if we were to get to a situation where we incurred those tariffs and costs, then we would have to think long and hard about what the future of our operations in the UK would be and what further investments we could make there. I do want to stress that we love being in the UK. We've been there for a long, long time, and it's a great place to do business. But anything that makes it less competitive would be a challenge for us.
If there is a no-deal Brexit, what are the tariffs you face?
Well, we would default to WTO tariffs, so we would potentially face a 10% duty on vehicles and on components going back out of the UK to the EU. So that would instantly put cost into our system. So, that's what we're trying to avoid.
But I notice you don't want to put a figure on it. Maybe you don't know the figure, but we are talking probably more than a billion, maybe billions.
We've said in the past that the tariff cost for us would be around about $1 billion. We tend to calculate in dollars, but it would be around about $1 billion, so that's a cost that obviously our business can ill afford.
I'm wondering, what are the jobs implications if we fall out with no deal?
I've said there's 14,000 plus people in the UK that we employ there, and it would have a material impact potentially on our employment levels if we had to adjust our footprint moving forward. I don't know how much clearer we can be about the consequences than we have been for the last 2.5 years, and I think it's time that people came together in Parliament, across the government, and recognised the fact that a no-deal outcome is not an option for industry in the UK.
As I speak, Mrs May is having a cabinet meeting 200 yards behind me. That's a pretty key body. There are MPs gathered in the chamber here. They'll all be watching at some point during this programme, or a good number of them. What would your message actually be? They've got a choice. They can either go for no deal, or they can go for either not going for Brexit at all, or conceivably for some kind of fix-up in between. What's your advice to them tonight as chairman of Ford Europe?
Time to get together, time to get to a deal, time to continue to give us free access to Europe from the UK.
Stephen Armstrong, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.
The latest now on Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn has said he will meet the Prime Minister to discuss a possible Brexit deal. Labour say the first he heard of her offer was when he saw it on the telly.
So we need to ensure that Parliament has an opportunity to vote on proposals that can prevent us crashing out of the EU in the end of next week. And we also need to ensure that we give security and certainty to the people of this country that there will not be a crashing out at the end of this process.
Just one demonstrator tonight. That's Channel 4 News.
Now, as the government and Parliament struggle to find that Brexit compromise, they'll have to convince European leaders who meet in just 1 week's time that they have a workable solution. The Dutch Prime Minister today described a no-deal Brexit as probable. The builders are in at the Eurotunnel terminals in Dover and Calais, for example, all part of the plan to ease potentially huge traffic jams that might start later this month. One element of the UK planning is to encourage traffic to use other crossings, Portsmouth being among them. You'd think by now they'd be working up plans with their French opposite numbers, wouldn't you? Well, our economics editor Ben Chu has news for us, and it's not good.
One of the biggest dangers of a no-deal Brexit is acknowledged to be queues and blockages in Dover due to the sudden imposition of new border customs checks. The Department for Transport's contingency plan is to charter additional ferries to take the pressure off that Calais-Dover route, which accounts for 80% of our roll-on, roll-off lorry traffic, something a former Brexit secretary only belatedly discovered.
I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but if you look at the UK and you look at how we trade in goods, we're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing.
And one of those key relief routes is Portsmouth, already the second busiest cross-channel port. The Department for Transport has commissioned Brittany Ferries at a cost of just under £50 million to run services, including between Portsmouth and Le Havre and Caen in France, for 6 months starting this week. But Newsnight has learned of something that raises further concern about the adequacy of that vital no-deal scenario planning and the competence of the Department for Transport and its under-fire boss Chris Grayling. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, additional ferries should be steaming out of here bound for French ports. But Newsnight has obtained a document from the Department for Transport which analyses the ability of Portsmouth to cope. And what this document reveals is that the department has not engaged with French port operators to discern their ability to cope with the additional traffic at that end. Indeed, the document says that the department has been forced to rely on satellite imagery to form its judgment. The upshot is that it concedes a lot of the assumptions it makes are untested.
We have not engaged with French port operators or the ferry companies sailing to these ports, so these assumptions are untested.
Has anything substantially changed since that internal document first appeared in January? The DfT said in a statement,
"As a responsible government, it is only right that we push on with contingency planning, and we continue to work closely with ports to help them prepare for any potential impacts of the UK's exit from the EU. We do not comment on the veracity or relevance of leaked documents."
There's some important context to all this. A fierce row has broken out between Portsmouth and the Department for Transport over central funding and support for the city's overall no-deal planning.
All the way down the line, I think the Department for Transport has, in the view of our Local Resilience Forum, which is chaired by our Chief Constable, has behaved very, very badly, and we've had no support from them at all.
There's another slightly strange twist in the tale of this document. Hampshire's Local Resilience Forum, a group made up of local emergency services bosses and neighbouring councils, say they were not initially sent it by the Department for Transport. Indeed, they had to extract it from the Channel Islands. And they claim that the Channel Islands had been instructed by the Department for Transport not to pass it on to them, even though it intimately concerned Portsmouth.
What Newsnight has uncovered is about more than a row between officials in Portsmouth and officials in London. It also raises much larger questions of competence around no-deal planning from this government. It comes on top of the seaborne freight fiasco, where a contract to run services was awarded to a company with no ships, and last month's €33 million tunnel out-of-court settlement by the Department for Transport. The choppy waters for this department may not be over.
Ben Chew there.